We have to treat this entity of AI like a junior employee, a junior dev, project associate, a process associate, and train them up and get them, productive just like we would a human. But a lot of times when we think about technology, we expect it just to work, right? Without having to think about all of what goes into making something effective.
Welcome to the Chief AI Officer or CAIO Podcast, where AI mentor Sanjay Puri talks with the leaders shaping tomorrow's technology. We explore their stories, challenges, and big ideas driving change. So if you're curious about how AI is transforming work, business, and everyday life, this is your front row seat to the future. Our guest today on the Chief AI Officer podcast is Marc Kermisch, Chief Technology and AI Officer at Protolabs, the global leader in digital manufacturing that's redefining how products go from idea to reality. With over 25 years of experience driving innovation across industries, Marc is shaping how AI transforms the journey from prototype to production.
Marc, welcome to the 7 days a week CAIO podcast.
Well, thank you, Sanjay, and I appreciate that introduction. It's always humbling when you hear your story echoed back to you.
No, absolutely, Marc. Marc, talking about stories, you learned programming on Logo as a kid, and you said it was like woodworking, only you could do it faster and you wouldn't have your dad yelling at you. That probably is the most relatable explanation for anyone wanting to get into software development that I have heard. So that's a pretty good beginning. But Marc, we have a global audience. Our audience is made up of your peers. It's made up of aspiring chief AI officers, AI entrepreneurs, and AI experts. And for them, you've been at Protolabs just for a very short period of time as their first chief technology and AI officer. What has surprised you most about digital manufacturing? You come from agriculture or before that, pharmacy benefits. What's fundamentally different about applying AI to on demand manufacturing?
I think what's super exciting to me, and maybe something that's been confirmed as I've joined, is digital manufacturing really is at the cross section of software and hardware. Right, you've got very complex machines that they run on machine code. Right, they've typically had an operator that's I'll call it a tradesman that is programming those machines. And by overlaying software, we're actually able to kind of take the customer from their idea straight into the machine in and of itself and expose the aspects of that machine that are unique. So as they're designing their product, they can design that product for the machines that we offer. That's partly why being a digital manufacturer with a rapid capability to turn parts around for our customers is a unique value proposition. And I think that's probably the confirmation of that software and hardware intersection has been fantastic. And we're just barely scratching the surface of how we can take advantage of these machines in our plants and how we can expose them almost like an API back to a CAD engineer who's designing.
And with the effort, at least in the US, Marc, to bring manufacturing back, obviously the work that you're doing and your company does becomes even more amplified, I would say so, in this current environment. Marc, in the press release that announced your appointment, you said that AI has the capability to transform every business process at Protolabs, from intuitive online coding to advanced machine automation to quality control. Where in that whole chain are you seeing the most immediate opportunity for AI? And where are you finding some potential resistance?
So I think one of the areas that AI is critical is around the analysis of the CAD file in and of itself, right? It's the process of designing for manufacturing. So we're using AI to evaluate, what is this part that we're being asked to manufacture? Can we actually manufacture it with the tooling that we have? How can we ensure if it's a part that's being used in medical, for example, right? There's certain standards that part has to meet. So can we apply those standards to the drawing and be able to advise back to that engineer, here are areas that you need to increase tolerances on, or you might need to think about the shape and the manufacturing, process to improve the quality. A lot of engineers are not fully immersed in the ISO standards that their parts have to meet. So it's a way for us to bring AI into the flow and provide that real-time feedback. So that's kind of where we probably see the biggest value. It's where we spent the most time investing over the course of the history of the company. When you take a big step back, there's a couple of really big opportunities that I think we can provide. There is a infinite amount of materials that an engineer can pick to design their part into. Different types of aluminums, different types of steels, titanium, plastic parts, polymers, et cetera, and understanding which material might be most relevant to their use case is often your traditional type it into Google and read a bunch of documentation. And so we're starting to take those data sets and applying our experience in making millions of parts with standard documentation in the marketplace. So while they're in the flow of quoting their product with us, they can use an AI experience to actually interact with that knowledge base and get recommendations on what kind of materials would be most valuable to them. As we also look at how we drive productivity within our plants, we collect a lot of machine data kind of through an Internet of Things type of an architecture. And, for us, we want to make sure our machines are running 24 hours, 7 days a week. And so any of that preventative maintenance data that signals off of those machines, or we can use AI to help us schedule maintenance into our workflows as a way to ensure that our machines are running at full capacity. What's interesting is, some of the areas of resistance that we see with AI utilization, is kind of across our own software engineers or our own mechanical engineers, right? And part of it is, as you know, any engineer looks at any tool set of, is it as good as me, right? Is it solving my needs immediately? And there's a lot of times, AI, its first stab at a problem set doesn't meet your expectations. And so there is this resistance of how much time do I as an engineer have to invest to make AI work for me so I can automate my code, or I can, get, those, type ahead suggestions, or I can run a CAD file through and automate a set of tasks and drawings. And so there's that personal change management that we have to lean into, that we have to have our own internal resilience to work through the shortcomings of AI to make it effective.
Would you say some of it is change management also, or when you talk about expectation setting, is there something you could do better in terms of expectation setting, or is there some sort of change management, Mark?
3 years ago when ChatGPT launched, right? Every Wall Street Journal headline was about, targeting CEOs of like, hey, this is the magic button to save 80% of your headcount costs and radically reduce your SG&A. The reality is, AI can help, but it's not this moonshot experience that CEOs were expecting. So I think we have to set expectations with the users of AI of, look, if you can automate 5 or 10 or 15% of your least favorite tasks, like let's start with that, right? A software engineer or business user on how to interact with that AI, right? And how to get real-time feedback. And so, things that we've started to do at Protolabs and even with some of my prior work is let's walk through what are the questions we expect AI to help us answer, and what would the outcomes be if this was something I was doing as a human. And then let's measure and test against that and know that we're training effectively what is an infant to become a teenager, to become a moderate young adult who can provide us value. We have to treat this entity of AI like a junior employee, a junior dev, a project associate, a process associate, and train them up and get them productive just like we would a human. But a lot of times when we think about technology, we expect it just to work, right? Without having to think about all of what goes into making something effective.
One is just a little bit of a curiosity. I've had a lot of your peers in manufacturing come in, and they talk, at least a lot of them are using digital twins in that kind of setup. Is that something that you have looked at in Protolabs, or it doesn't make any sense there?
Within Pearl Labs, we haven't done a lot around digital twins, right? We make parts for other people. And so in that respect, it's not quite as relevant to our business. In CNH, however, digital twins was a very hot topic. It's very expensive to build, prototype machines. If you're doing a combine or a tractor, they have really long lead times, very complex parts. And so we built digital twins to manage simulation, right? So think about, a harvester where you're bringing grain in through the header of a combine. You're then essentially separating out the grain from its shell, and then you're managing that chaff out the back of it and the grain into the bucket. The number one thing that a farmer looks for is wastage, right? Am I capturing 100% of my grain, or how much is going out the back that I'm losing money on? And then the second is quality, right? I don't want to crush the grain. I just want to break the shell so I can separate it. So we did a lot of simulation, right? Being able to kind of emulate grain coming into that combine, how it was being processed and where it was going. And it really helped us shorten our product life cycles, in part because, in the United States, you harvest once a year, right? In South America, maybe it's 2 times a year. Same in Australia. Europe, it's back to once a year. And so you have these really long testing cycles if we did it in the field all the time. And so being able to create simulation is something that I think really, helps an organization shorten their testing life cycles. As I think about that back to Protolabs, I do think that we could embed some simulation services depending on your part. So we do a lot of work in aerospace engineering and supporting the aerospace and defense markets. Being able to apply a set of force simulation potentially while they're sharing their initial design with us, and creating a digital twin of an environment. So if I'm launching a rocket into space, can I replicate a simulation around forces against that part? That's an area where I could see us using AI to emulate that environment to add value to our customers as they're trying to design their parts with our manufacturing capabilities.
So that's good to know. So there are some possibilities there. Mark, the second question I have is you kind of alluded that AI is like a junior associate or a junior employee. Let me stretch it a little bit to a favorite topic of your peers who come on our podcast is agentic AI and AI agents. Is that something, and I know you've been at Protolabs, well, pretty recently, but is that something you're looking at? And when you look at that, when you talk about junior employees, etc., where do agents fit into an organization just at a higher level, not even at Protolabs? What is your perspective? Where do they fit in?
So at Protolabs, we're absolutely experimenting with agentic AI. I think one of the areas that's leading us is in our marketing organization. Our chief marketing officer, even before I started looking at third parties, Chat GPT and a product called Conversa to help with content creation, to help with, we do a lot of work through e-commerce. So to help kind of, our buyers through that e-commerce process, and to field questions, or to create rapid content that would normally, take hours or days or an external party to develop for us. And so they've been able to drive productivity, they've been able to save cost, and ultimately create a better customer experience. We're now starting to look at, we have a lot of technical debt being a 35-year-old company. We have a lot of systems we built from the beginning that, we need to start to modernize, but that modernization takes time. And so agentic AI is a fantastic way to kind of leapfrog. So I can start to add additional automation and reduce manual processes without having to touch the underlying core technology and provide immediate value. So our finance team is using some tools around AP and AR management, right? And automating that three-way match so they can pay invoices faster or they can get bills out the door faster. We're starting to look at how we can create tool sets using agentic AI for our sales teams and our technical sales engineers, where they're working with a customer to ensure that their parts are meeting their certifications. If it's an ISO standard for medical, or if it's an ITAR defense standard for privacy and information protection, we're now able to load drawings into these AI models and get immediate feedback, right? And what we're doing is we're enabling a salesperson who had to usually wait in the queue for a CAD engineer to be available to have that conversation and do that analysis. We're now taking that knowledge and putting it right in the hands of the salesperson through agentic AI. So they've almost got like a CAD engineer, junior assistant right next to them. What's interesting is I believe in our org charts, we're going to start to see agents show up in the org chart, right? So Marc Kermisch might be the CTO, but Marc Kermisch has 5 or 6 AI assistants that report to him. And those assistants have a certain level of identity and access management across the organization. We provision access just like we would a human to the agent. And one agent that I'd love to have, right, is a personal assistant that writes status reports for my boss, right? Fields incoming emails from my teams and provides and traffics them to get them answers back faster. Gets out there and takes all of the outside news that happens in my industry and summarizes it for a competitive newsletter to me every morning, right? So those are things that, I'm personally working on to drive my own productivity, but that we're also starting to set that tone for the organization that, agents should be thought about as a part of the organization, just like you would a human coworker. You're now going to have agent coworkers, even all the way down to, recent grads. I would expect them to potentially have research agents that they may be able to deploy to help them drive automation and accelerate their onboarding.
You told CIO.com that you feel like we are in a big science fair with Gen AI and 8 out of 10 are failing. That's refreshingly honest in a landscape where everyone claims success. What separates the two experiments that succeed from the 8 that don't? What are the common characteristics of failed AI projects, according to you?
A lot of use cases are developed that are not relevant to AI, right? There may be more of an analytics use case, or maybe it's really more of a machine learning use case where you don't need the agentic aspect of AI, you just need more of an algorithmic application. And, so I think making sure that the use case matches the capability of what artificial intelligence in today's terms can do. I think the second is, not having good defined KPIs tied to that use case, right? So, for example, if I am producing an agent to write press releases and marketing, what is it that you're trying to solve for? Is it solving for productivity gains? Is it solving? So I'm going to insource from an agency internally, so now I can save money. And so when you don't have those things defined up front, then you don't know, like, am I seeing success or not success? Because a lot of times, just that simple agent could take hundreds of hours to get it to write a PR release in the voice of Protolabs with the right context. So it doesn't need a lot of human intervention. And so putting KPIs, I think, is really important. I think the third piece is resilience, right? Like I said, you're probably going to see, very low success rate on the early trials of AI. One example is, you also may see failure rates in the architecture you choose. So maybe I choose Copilot Studio from Microsoft, which is a low code way to write agents, but then I start bumping up against its own data limits, right? I've got 200-page PDF files that need to be parsed down, and Copilot can't do it. So I wasted a bunch of time and money doing that. And now I've got to re-architect it into maybe Azure AI Foundry, where I can use Azure AI Search to parse the raw data so that the agentic aspects can actually train the LLM and learn the context. And then as I'm testing, I need to make sure I've got a set of questions and answers that I know are right to determine, is the AI actually responding appropriately? Can it cite the pages of where it's pulling knowledge from? Right? Can it, re-render the graphics or drawings maybe that's part of that knowledge base? And so what I often find is companies just don't have the resilience of, okay, this didn't work, so it must not be a valid use case for AI, versus maybe saying, hey, maybe the underlying architecture wasn't right, and I've got to rethink that architecture. And I think the last piece is, did you have a defined budget for your use case, right? And if you haven't said I'm willing to invest as a $10,000 or $100,000 into this use case to get it to success, then it's too easy to quit.
Talking about failures, in your article, AI strategies is more than zeros and ones. You wrote that CEOs are often paralyzed by where to start, while tech leaders start with the tactical, focusing on what the technology solutions are and deploying them in pilots or shotgunning them across all employees like Microsoft Copilot. What's the right starting point that avoids both paralysis and shotgunning, Mark?
Almost any enterprise is going to have a series of software partners: Salesforce, Microsoft, Oracle, whatever. They're all investing in AI frameworks. Sometimes they're embedded in their software, like Salesforce. Sometimes it's a more of a framework or utility tool like Copilot or Microsoft. So start with your vendors first, right? Leverage the investments you've already made and the vendors that are building AI into their products as a way to experiment and learn. The second is, take a look at some of those low code capabilities, if it's from Copilot or from ChatGPT or other, and train some teams to be able to use that to try to automate their own work, right? And so we're not necessarily building our own LLMs in this case, but it's, can I automate and invoices coming in and keying them into my ERP? If I'm customer service, can I auto route emails that are coming in so it goes to the right agent? Can I start to provide access to the knowledge sources through an agentic experience instead of having to look at a bunch of links and click on them? And then as you mature through that and you start to learn more about the capabilities of AI, then that very last piece is maybe I start to build my own models on top of an AI framework from Google, from Claude, from Microsoft, because they've made the investments in the GPUs, they've made the investments in the base LLM, and they've then built a set of tools for you to utilize. So that's the technology side. On the use case side, to me, it's getting a broad set of cross-functional leaders together, giving them, an introduction to what AI is and what its capabilities are. And then it's running a series of workshops to determine how many use cases can you put up on post-it notes on the wall that we can then go evaluate. Right. And so, typically in a couple of hours, you can get a couple hundred use cases from your sales team and your customer service teams, your operations teams, and so on and so forth. And then, after that, come back together with a small working team, finance, technology, maybe a couple business resources to then, scrub those and determine where can we move quickly. Is a use case that I can immediately go to my Salesforce partner and say, hey, I got this use case now, let's go do it. Or maybe it's building something in an AI framework, but pick the top 10, right? And put them in order on speed to market and impact to the company, and try to find those that are high impact, that are super fast, right? And getting those quick wins to build momentum, I think, is really important for the organization. And sometimes it's the simplest things like, some things I did internally is I took our PDF handbooks, that's the HR policies, and I used Notebook LM from Google to create a podcast, right? I asked it to be light and funny. So you take a very dry topic and you immediately use AI to create this podcast for people to listen to. And it drives the consumption of that data up where before everyone just scrolled to the bottom, clicked accept, and never read the document, right? Super simple use case. It's a great example of what AI can do. Everybody always cracks up with how the commentary comes out, but it's a start. And sometimes I find my peers go, but is that really AI, Mark? Like, that's not an agentic experience. And I'm like, you know what though? Like, you would have had to spend 100 grand to get two actors to come in and read that, produce it, and put it on your intranet. And now you can do it for free in less than 10 minutes. It's a great example of AI, right? And then move up the chain of complexity as you get those wins. Because I think you start to build momentum and excitement every time you showcase a success.
Mark, you have also said that Gen AI is not the panacea we all thought it would be, and noted that Copilot, which you talked about several times, adoption declines after 30 days. Now, given that Microsoft says 90% of Fortune 500 companies have adopted Copilot, what's causing that adoption decay, and how are you thinking about preventing it at Protolabs?
The number one leader in the reduced adoption is lack of training. Even when the internet and Google first launched, you had that common search bar, right? Like, people had to learn how to type in the right words to get the right results. And over the years, we've all learned how to be more efficient with it. It's no different when you're doing prompt engineering. And 2, 3 years ago, there was this concept that, oh, we're going to have prompt engineers as a title in the company, right? In reality, we need to train all of our employees how to be good prompt engineers. And I've got my own library of prompts that I've saved. And when I show that to folks that are just getting started in their AI journey, many of them are surprised that I've got paragraph long prompts that I might use to do an activity with AI. And they're like, I thought this was supposed to be simple and easy. And I said, AI, you have to converse with it just like you would a human. The more context and the more specificity you can give it, the better your response is going to be from it. And so some things that we're starting to do is, one is, bringing in some external expertise that are really smart in how to do prompt engineering to start to train, at all levels across the company, following that up within each business function, creating a super user or an AI change champion in that business unit that can actually act as a single point of contact for their team. And then creating communities of practice, right? Let's bring people together where they can share what's working for them, share the prompts that they're finding a lot of success with. Let's create a library of those so we can show the whole company what's available to them, but also be able to work with their peers of like, hey, I'm struggling with this particular use case, right? Has anyone solved this out there? Who has an idea that could help me solve this use case? And allowing them to kind of crowdsource from the company on that. Without that kind of a framework in place, people are left to their own devices, right? Just like any technology adoption, those that are always going to be early adopters are going to have the resilience to learn on their own, and those that are maybe a bit more conservative, they're going to wait to see what everybody else does. They might poke at it, but often they'll just let it sit. And we have to change how we work, right? So if you just think about the tools inside of, if it's Google Gemini or if it's Microsoft's Copilot and you're using their work productivity suites, like most of us started our day by looking at our email, right? I start my day by opening up Copilot and inserting my prompts, summarize emails from the last 3 days, and order of things I need to take care of first, right? So now I'm no longer going to my inbox. I start with my agent that's going to do that for me. And that's a change in behavior. And those are the things that we have to retool and skill our employees on for them to be effective in it. And what I love about, Microsoft's, number is in reality, yes, 90% of companies have Copilot licenses. But I would ask, what's the utilization rate? And there's great tools. If you're a Microsoft shop, you can see what that utilization rate is. And then you can lean into that to where you need to put your training.
So simple productivity hacks, I think, make a lot of sense from you. Mark, one of the questions that came in for you was, you have served on multiple boards, whether it's American Ag Credit, Crew Car Wash, etc. How do board level conversations about AI differ from C-suite conversations? And what questions are board members asking that chief AI officers often are prepared to answer?
With how much emphasis has been put on cybersecurity and boards being tasked with helping companies manage their risk, some of the first sets of questions are going to go after is it secure? Do we know where the data you're putting into the AI is going? How are we protecting our customers' data and our employees' data? And in part because there's a lot of black box aspects of AI today that we don't always know how that data is used, right? Yeah, I think the CIO, this Chief Information Security Officer, and ultimately the leadership team, have to be prepared to understand AI at a level that they can answer those kinds of questions, right? And it might, in some cases, push them in a direction of, look, free tools are great, but free tools don't provide the security protections when you pay for it. So buying an enterprise, license to OpenAI or an enterprise license to Amazon Bedrock or Microsoft Copilot are ways for you to start to structure that AI security. The other question that often comes up is, how are we being ethical and responsible in the AI that we're creating to ensure that we're not creating AI that will have biases in it, that will, still treat the data with the utmost respect, that won't accidentally breach confidentiality of information as that AI agent's being used. And those are harder questions to answer, because if we're using off the shelf products from our big vendors, we have to go into like, how are they building responsible AI? Microsoft has published a whole white paper around AI responsibility of how they're approaching it, as has OpenAI, as has Anthropic, but they're all at different levels of maturity, right? And then the third is, going back to that ROI, right? The boards are always thoughtful about, the return to shareholder. And, they want to know, how are we actually using AI to drive cost savings and productivity in the organization? And they want real world examples, because they hear in the press, Twitter fired 45% of its engineers. They used AI to write code. They've seen no drop in productivity. So the worst question a CAIO could get would be, so are you going to fire half your staff? Right? And there's a lot that goes into an answer and a question like that. And so you've got to be prepared for some of those left field, examples that you have to respond to and be prepared to work through with your board.
Talking, Mark, about ROI at CNH Industrial, you set a specific goal of saving 10,000 developer hours with GitHub Copilot, and you tracked it manually. Recent research, and there's all kinds of research. You could get lost. Shows only 23% of enterprises actually measure AI ROI. Can you walk our listeners a little bit through how you instrumented that measurement at CNH? How did you track the hours saved without creating additional overhead that eliminated the savings?
We asked our managers to have active conversations with our engineers, right? So a lot of that savings that we were getting was anecdotal, right? So you'd sit down with the engineer and say, walk me through how you used AI to save time this past week. And what we learned is in many cases it was, hey, AI allowed me to, go back and document all of my code and write unit tests for my code. I was able to actually automate, some of the library access or data access jobs that I was writing. Went through and recommended code improvements as I was trying to go through some security assessment of my code. And we'd ask them, quantify that in time, right? And they would say, oh, it's probably 2 hours, right? We did throw out a basic Excel spreadsheet using the fantastic tool of Excel of, hey, just put your, put the use case and the number of hours you think you save every week on that use case. And so we started to collect it that way. And so we tried to be as lightweight as possible, be a bit anecdotal about it, which, so there was probably noise in that data as we got it back, but it was directionally correct. And it gave us at least enough information to show back to leadership of like, hey, this $300 investment per engineer for Copilot is adding value. Because if I'm spending $300 a year, I really only need to save maybe 4 or 5 hours a year to justify that license cost, right? But when you have that across hundreds of engineers, it looks like a really big expense. And so being able to show back how you're saving money, I think is important, no matter if it's an engineer's job or if it's in marketing or operations or sales.
Mark, shifting a little bit towards talking about talent, because there's a war for AI talent, or a battle, whatever you want to call it. You built your entire career in the Midwest, Minneapolis, Minnesota specifically. A lot of the AI talent, at least in the US, concentrates in Silicon Valley, Seattle, and New York. But you've proven that there's a talent outside coastal tech hubs. How do you win the battle for AI talent when you're competing against companies, especially when you look at what Meta has done in terms of the comp? They are offering hundreds of millions of dollars, and working on foundation models. What's your pitch? Because there are a lot of people listening to you who might be interested in working for a Protolabs. What's your pitch to an AI engineer or data scientist, but why they should join a Midwest manufacturer?
To me, it starts with the work that you're offering them to do, right? And the one thing I love about manufacturing is it's very tangible. You can walk into your plants, you can see how they're operating, you can see the product you're producing for your customer. You can talk to your customer and immediately get the impact that you're having with them. With Protolabs, we have some fantastic customers, right? We have a lot of those big Silicon Valley names that you hear about are using our services to build their hardware products, right? And so I'm talking with an engineer and you start to share, it's like, hey, we're on the very front end of the prototyping phase and the new product introduction with some of the biggest technology companies in the world. And your software code is helping, enable those capabilities for us and for them. And so it's really making sure they understand the use case of how they're going to apply their skills. Right. It was one of the same things I loved about CNH is you could get a young engineer excited about helping a farmer and educate them on how sophisticated that customer base is, way more than they may have realized. And that, hey, we're trying to automate and create an autonomous combine that weighs 400 tons, right? That's a lot different than a car, right? And by the way, it produces $1 million in revenue every day it does harvesting, and so you can see that tangible outcome. And in Protolabs, it's no different. We have a smaller pool of engineers, right? Because we're based here in the Midwest. Whether you'll often hear about Minnesota is it's super hard to get somebody to move here, but it's even harder to get them to leave, right? So we've got great schools, strong infrastructure, world class Fortune 500 companies, really good universities, right? And so that's the benefit. But it also means I can take kids who maybe don't want to leave the Twin Cities when they're coming out of college, and I can invest in them and give them a great use case and training so they build their skills here instead of upping and moving out to the coast. And so it's a battle every day to drive those attractions. A lot of it comes in as, Midwesterners are early risers and they want to be at work, 6, 7, 8 a.m. But they also want to be able to go home to their families at, 3, 4, or 5 and be there for their kids. And that's an aspect of that 7 days a week where we can afford their abilities to have a family, have a reasonable commute, and they're more than willing to pop back online, after kids go to bed and finish up work tasks if they have to. But you're able to create that integrated life here in a relatively easy manner.
What are the top 1, 2, or 3 things that you look for in someone that you want to hire?
The things that are harder to train on are those soft skills. So I always tend to hire for 3 things. I want hyper curious individuals. I want somebody who's got the grit and perseverance to work through the hard problems. And I want somebody who's going to take agency of the decisions that they can make, right? They're self-starters. If I can find somebody who's curious, who's going to have some grit and is a self-motivated individual, I'll invest all the training in the world to increase and improve their technical skills. But it's really hard to train curiosity or grit or self-agency. And so those are the 3 things that I typically look for in any hire I make, be it an engineer, a technical product manager, or a leader.
Claude or ChatGPT?
ChatGPT.
Oh, okay. Sam's going to be happy. Open source or proprietary AI models?
Open source, please.
Okay. Agentic AI, Mark, is it hype or reality?
Can I say both?
Best AI use case you have implemented?
To date, the best use case I've implemented is taking technical service manuals that are thousands of pages and applying an agentic experience on top of it. So I, as a tech, if I'm a mechanic, this was our first use case, I can find how to instructions on how to fix something on my vehicle in seconds instead of having to go to that dusty manual or dusty computer and try to find that file. It provided immediate knowledge, immediate productivity improvement, in the pocket of the mechanic on their phone. It was a great use case.
Awesome. Build or buy AI solutions?
I'm going to say my bias is to build on top of an AI framework.
Makes sense. You talked about governance. So what is your governance framework? Is it permissive or is it restrictive?
My bias is for permissive.
Okay.
We've got to be willing to take some risks with some guardrails and allow people to experiment instead of restricting and putting our heads in the sand.
Okay. And advice for aspiring chief AI officers in 1 word?
Stay curious.
I was going to say curiosity. So Mark, looking at a crystal ball, will you still be the chief AI officer or chief technology and AI officer in 5 years?
I certainly hope so. I've built my career on technology. I've never had a boring day being a technologist. And, I've had the pleasure of living through the biggest technology advancements in our lifetime, from the invention of the personal computer to the mobile phone to the internet to now AI. I can't wait to have my own AI robot, like Rosie the robot, from the Jetsons in my house doing chores for me. I'm looking forward to that, and my self-driving car. Those things are going to be fantastic advancements for us as a society.
Our audience, as you know, is made up of AI leaders, aspiring chief AI officers, and tech workers trying to navigate this transformation. Can you give them one simple piece of advice that is highly tactical and maybe actionable?
Experiment every day with the AI tools at your fingertips, right? Doesn't matter if it's ChatGPT or something you've built as a side project. That experimentation is going to keep you sharp because this part of our industry is moving at lightning speed. And I think the second piece of advice is, while we don't know everything, we are the experts in our companies for what AI is. And so we have to do that through constant dialogue and conversation with our C-suite, with the next level down leaders, and with the broader organization. So your voice needs to be amplified and get out there and champion what AI can do, regardless of its limitations. If your companies aren't experimenting, they're starting to fall behind.
Absolutely. experiment and amplify. Marc, thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's been a fantastic conversation today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Chief AI Officer podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. And share it with someone curious about the future of AI. Join us every Friday right here on the CAIO podcast as we share more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead.